Welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, tantra, leadership, sexuality, polyamory, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Inner Work Community Podcast offers a safe yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. This is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. Welcome back to the Inner Work Community Podcast and YouTube channel. Hey, I wanted to make an episode about projection because this is a word that is used all the time, right? It's popularized the way that calling people a narcissist or using the word boundaries when you just don't want to do something or you don't want someone else to do something. It's one of those words. So I wanted to unpack it a bit, especially from the Jungian lens, because it is such a key word and paradigm for how we understand our reactions to people, right? Because we move through every single day and we have a lot of different reactions to people. Some of them, most of them, are completely unnoticeable. We don't realize how we're impacted, but we may have a very strong charge with one person, and then that's very positive. And then we might have a very strong charge with someone else that's very negative, right? We're drawn to some people, we're repulsed and repelled by others. So projection and the language around projection can be really helpful for understanding and diagnosing kind of what's happening beneath your conscious reality that could be playing into how you're moving through your day. So we're going to dive into projection. So when you hear this word, I want you to think of it as a metaphor. Okay, it's not just a word, but it's somewhat of a metaphor. So think about a projector screen. Think about going to the movies, right? When you or a projectile, right? You know, all of these are images of things that are located in one place, but we often see them in another place. We go to the movies and we watch the movie on the screen, but the movie that's playing on the screen is actually playing behind us in like a room up top, right? They don't still have like the actual film feeding through, it's digital, but that's kind of what it is, right? We need the screen. We need to be able to see the projection on the screen, but the film itself, the movie itself, is technically not playing on the screen. We're seeing it on the screen, but it's playing behind us. There's a quote by Robert Johnson. He says, "We barely understand how much of what we perceive in others and the outside world are actually parts of ourselves. Please observe the energy investments you make. Many psychological, and I would add relational problems, geopolitical problems, are a failure to differentiate between out there and in here." So what is projection? All right, projection is our attempt to discard unwanted or uncomfortable parts, qualities, attitudes, beliefs, anything that we don't want to acknowledge or own in ourselves, anything that makes us wildly uncomfortable to even approach. We tend to place that outside of ourselves, right? When we don't like something, when something makes us uncomfortable, we hopefully try to remove ourselves from it. And that's kind of what's happening here. And what is it we're removing ourselves from? It is our own shadow. So when we talk about projection, we're talking about our shadow projecting out onto other people, onto other situations. Okay? When you think about the shadow. I talk about this in my Jung's Map of the Soul workshop, which you can find on my YouTube channel. I talk about, well, Robert Bly, actually, it's a quote that he has about how the shadow is like a long bag we drag behind us. And the shadow is kind of like this bag. It's this container that holds these unwanted, discarded parts, qualities, beliefs, attitudes, things that have at one point likely didn't serve the needs that we had for affection, for affirmation, to get our most basic needs met, for food, shelter, clothing. And so we repress, hide, and deny those parts in order to meet the expectations of our environment. Those things don't go away. They go into a bag, and that bag becomes the container that we drag around through life. So when you think about projection, I want you to know that it's actually a gift. Projecting it's a gift to us, because when those parts fall out of consciousness, the only way for them to become conscious again is for them to show up in our lives, right? Like, this is a huge part of shadow work, by the way. Shadow work is not just, searching for a plot of land to just start, taking our little metal detector to and seeing what we can find. It starts with what we're reacting to in our world, right? Who are the people that drive you crazy? Who are the people that feel like if they're not in your life, you lose your identity? Who are the people that hold so much power and influence in your life that, the thought of them not being there creates so much anxiety and so much disorientation that it's not even on the table to think about? Those tend to be, those kinds of high energy, high voltage relationships tend to be where our projections are, and also tend to be the mirror that we can look into to see what we can't otherwise see in ourselves. All right. So projections can be positive and they can be negative. I've said this kind of already, but negative not in bad and positive not as in good, but they can be kind of, you can be moving towards someone. We're projecting onto a person and we want to be in their presence. We want to be around them. Or it can be negative and we can be repulsed by that person or a different person and just say, I cannot, I absolutely despise being anywhere near them. So noticing those reactions, right? If you have high voltage around a person, notice, is it positive? Am I leaning towards them? Or is it negative? Am I leaning away from them, avoiding them? Am I crossing the street to, not have to even say hi? How are you going out of your way to not interact with this person? Or how are you going out of your way to interact with this person? So projections, though they are a gift, when we don't work with them, when we don't look at them and try to see what is it about that person or that experience or that group that ultimately is about me, when we don't do that work, they tend to keep us off balance, right? We don't know how to show up in our relationships. We tend to have a hard time knowing what the other person wants from us, because ultimately we are oriented around what they want from us or don't want from us. And so we tend to not show up authentically. And that can happen in a positive, when there's a positive projection, or in a negative one. They keep us from leaning in. You might have an entire group of friends, but there's that one person in the group that you're leaning away from. And it tends to affect all of the other relationships in that group, right? There's ways to work with that, by the way. It's not a death sentence for your friendship group. But it's worth noting, is there a person that you're just like, I cannot be around them. They drive me crazy, because that's where we would need to go. That's where you want to go. Maybe not with that person, right? You don't need to hash it out with them. That's work you can do to see, okay, what is it in me that when I look at them just makes me so uncomfortable, makes me so angry. It makes me want to just pull my hair out. I cannot stand it. It's like cringe, okay? Cringe is a good litmus test for projection. So what happens though when it's not just you projecting? That's a huge piece of this. It's kind of hidden because when I talk about projection, oftentimes with clients, the only framework a lot of my clients will start with is, well, how am I projecting onto other people? But the reality is we also are projected onto, and we can become the recipients, the receivers of people's projections. And you can kind of know this when you just feel an energy from someone. It's a vibe, right? It's a sense that they're really coming toward you. And that can be really flattering. And oftentimes, I mean, projection is the foundation for a lot of friendships, romantic relationships, partnerships. It's like, this person has what I've been looking for. Even if it's a part of you that you already have integrated, it's like, oh, that's what I want. That is the person, right? That's still in part a projection, because they're not purely that. They're a lot more than that. They're a lot less than that. But the magnetism, the energy is drawing you towards them, right? It's a golden part of you that you also see in them that is pulling you towards them. But we can be the recipients of projection, and people can put onto us their unwanted or uncomfortable parts that are either positive or negative. Now, there is a term I want to bring forward, which is called projective identification. And projective identification is when you become the recipient of someone's projection. This is really important for early childhood development. When you are little and you don't have an ego, you don't have a sense of identity yet. Well, you're surrounded by adults, most likely, other, perhaps older siblings, friends, coaches, teachers. You have people who have developed a sense of ego, and they've developed a sense of shadow. And when you're young, you are absorbing a lot of information. You're developing that ego, right? The forward-facing sense of identity. And you're also developing the shadow, what you don't want to be forward-facing. Well, an adult could be really out of touch. Let's say your teacher at school is really, really angry, right? And ultimately, they're really, really sad. They carry this deep sadness. But because it's not processed, it's in the shadow, it comes out as like passive aggression. It comes out as irritability. It comes out as even rage. And in that exchange, especially when it's consistent, you can take on, you start absorbing what they have unconsciously repressed in themselves, and they start projecting it out onto everyone, and it just gets lodged in you. And then as an adult, you walk around and you're walking on eggshells. You're attempting to be hyper vigilant of everything that's happening around you. Like, it's hard to even put into words, but there's this sense that like, oh, I need to take up less space, or oh, I need to take up more space because they're going to take up space for me, or oh, that person just spilled something. I need to go and like help them, which isn't a bad action, but if it's hyper, right, it's on overdrive. It's because you likely grew up in an environment that really trained you to take care of the needs of other people, because you were around adults who were not taking care of their own needs. And so they projected that out into the room, hoping, unconsciously, hoping someone would take it and care for it for them. They don't know how. And kids, we do that, right? We'll pick it up. We're like, oh, I can do that. That'll be how I start to identify, because then the ego gets formed around the sense of like, I can problem solve for adults. I can problem solve for the people around me. So notice that. Notice like, oh my God, I'm really over functioning in this part of my life. I'm really under functioning. I feel so much shame. I feel just kind of this atmospheric guilt. I owe the world something. That can be a huge indicator of like, who told you that? Like, who told you that you owe the world so much? So just start noticing, noticing the assumed atmospheric pressures that you just walk around in. So projections are not just nothing, right? Like someone might say, oh, I'm just projecting. We're never just projecting. We're never just seeing something in someone that is purely in ourselves and is not in them. Okay. Lisa Marciano from the This Jungian Life podcast talks a lot about this, and she talks about how projections are hooked, right? So you're walking through life, and there's this person you work with that just drives you crazy, right? It just absolutely makes you want to pull your hair out. And that person, say they take up too much room. They just constantly talk. They constantly seem think they have the solution. They don't include others, blah, blah, blah. Well, that person, when you have that reaction, those stories, those judgments around them, it's likely not untrue, right? If they are taking up space more than their fair share, it could very well be that that's objectively the case. But what you have to look at is your energy investment, right? That Robert Johnson talked about. What's the charge? Is it super loud? Is it super intense? And if so, what is it about them taking up all that space and talking so much? What is it about them doing that creates such a reaction in you, right? It's as though, you can imagine, someone with a fishing hook is casting the line over your head and then pulling out your shadow and bringing it forward. That's what it means to be, it's hooked, right? There's a hook in them that they're casting, unconsciously. It's not happening from them, but in some ways they are pulling that out of you. It's being drawn out of you. You're sending it out the way that you would send out your image into a mirror that then reflects that image back to you, right? And that's another great image for this, right? When we look into a mirror, what we're seeing something technically that is in front of us. It's not here. It's in front of us. But what we're seeing is us. It's who we are. Jason Smith uses the metaphor of a rearview mirror, because I think that's even better. He says, when we look in a rearview mirror, we actually are looking at something in front of us, but what we're really looking for, what we're observing, is behind us. And I love the little note, I guess it's still on side view mirrors in cars, right? That says, objects in mirror are closer than they appear. I love that, because it's the thing you're seeing in someone else is not as far away from you as it appears. It's closer to you. It's likely just behind you, just out of consciousness, in that little realm where you don't want to look, right? It's just in the shadow. Here's a quote from Connie Zweig in her book, Romancing the Shadow, which is about shadow projection in relationships. She says, "The shadow disguises itself in our projections when we react intensely to a trait in others that we fail to see in ourselves. If we feel disgusted, incredulous, embarrassed by another's trait or behavior, and our response is exaggerated, then we may be seeing an aspect of our own shadow indirectly out there where it is safer to observe it. It's psychologically safer to see it out there, right? We project by attributing this quality to the other person in an unconscious effort to banish it from ourselves. Whom do you hate? Who do you judge the most? What group of people most repulses or terrifies you? What is it that you cannot stand in a friend or a family member, right? So notice this is a lot of negative projection, assumed negative projection here. But you can also ask, what do you absolutely love? What do you admire in someone? Not just admire in I really admire that in them, and you go about your business. But you see it in them, and there is this just assumed reality that it doesn't exist in you, right? You're not able to do that, but they can. You can't. They're able to invest in their time, energy, passion, relationships, but you're not able to. And you just really admire and kind of envy and wish that was yours, but you just can't, right? There's this belief that you can't, but they are, and there's something different, there's something wrong, or there's something they have that you don't have, right? So there's a few types of projection that I want to parse out, because the more language we have, the clearer we can be about what's happening with this person, right? So the first type of projection is called just a personal projection, right? This is when you displace an unwanted part onto another person in order to banish it from yourself. It's like it's a part of you that you put onto someone else in order to not have to deal with it, and vice versa, right? Someone does that to you, but it's personal, right? It's part of your personality that would otherwise be conscious but isn't. It's in the shadow. So that's a personal projection. I love the prophet Jesus when he says, when he approaches the Pharisees, he gives this parable. He says, two individuals went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, a religious leader, stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, etc. Or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all that I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his chest and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, I really want to draw in something here, because Jesus in this context is speaking to the Pharisees, the religious leaders who have this assumption that they're good enough. They're starting from that perspective. They're starting from the perspective that I'm enough, I am better, actually. It's not about enough, it's about I am superior. And this person over here is not. And thank God I'm not like them. Now, if you have been raised in the common Christian myth, you know this story. You have been warned about being prideful. You have been warned about not thinking too highly of yourself and not exalting yourself. So at some level, you banished self-promotion, exaltation, a sense of being good, being above, whatever. You banished that into your shadow. And what went into your ego and persona, right, the way you present in the world, was this kind of false humility, or at least one-sided humility. It was this sense that I am not worthy. I am this sinner. I am, I need to stand at a distance. I need to step back. I know this because this is my story, and this is a story of countless people, countless clients that I work with. That our work is not about getting them to move from being the Pharisee to kind of this humble or more human version of themselves, like downward. Our work tends to be to, no, you need to take back all the power, agency, sense of identity and self, and the ability to create your life. You need to take that back and start working with that, because that's what's been in your shadow. Right? Because, Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, says that every light casts the shadow, and the closer we get to the light, the larger the shadow becomes. So whether you're the Pharisee or whether you're the tax collector, you can move so forward, so far into that image that then you start casting the shadow in the other direction. The tax collector starts casting this massive shadow. If you stay in that space, you start casting this shadow of you are enough. Why are you continually trying to get to zero? Why are you always trying to be forgiven? Why are you always feeling indebted to people? And like the best you can do is kind of wipe out your debt, but there's never any kind of capital, right? To use that metaphor, there's never relational capital. You're always barely breaking even, and the smallest setback, drops you all the way back down. So notice that, right? It's not the Pharisee or the tax collector, but integrating both, right? We need both. This is an archetype. It's the archetype of, you could say the disciple, the archetype of the one that is pursuing the divine. And we can either think too highly of ourselves or we think too low of ourselves. Neither is going to lead to wholeness. We have to do both. We have to play with both and integrate both. So now the next type of projection is what's called a transference, okay? A transference is different than a personal projection. A transference is when we displace an experience or an event or a person from the past. I had a mentor once call them a ghost from the past. It's when we take something that's happened to us and we place it onto another person. It's not necessarily a part of our personality, but it's an experience that we had that shaped us. And then that experience, which probably developed a template for how we would experience future similar experiences, becomes how we then interact with this present experience, right? So you just started a new job and you have this new supervisor and you start interacting with them and they say something to you like, hey, don't do it that way. I'm going to have you do it this way. Okay, this is a very small example, but I can say that kind of feedback, depending on the supervisor I've had, has been very unsettling because at the core, what I hear is not some sort of teaching. I hear kind of this like rejection or admonishment for like doing it wrong. Like I did it wrong. There's a right way to do it and I didn't do it that way. And so in that moment, you may experience a charge, an energy charge around this new supervisor. Because when you look at the new supervisor, what you see is not that current supervisor. What you see psychologically is the old supervisor or dad or mom or someone who had an authority over you that this person is able to hook out of you and bring on themselves, okay? And then you might end up interacting with them in a way that isn't authentic to that relationship and prevents that, employee-supervisor relationship from developing any further. But the reality is that can also be going from them to you. Yeah, so maybe you're the supervisor and there are people that report to you that just absolutely drive you crazy. You cannot stand how they show up, and maybe they actually have performance issues. But the charge itself isn't simply about the fact that they have objective workplace issues. It could be that, as a supervisor, you've done a fucking amazing job at being a great employee, and that's why you're in this role. And so you cannot stand someone who is maybe quote unquote incompetent or lacks initiative, right? So when you see that, it just has this charge in you. And you can justify it by being in a place of power and saying, hey, this is your job description. You're not doing that. We're going to have a discussion. But it also is an invitation for you personally. Take the supervisor hat off. And what is it about you that can't be irresponsible? What is it about you that responsibility itself feels like it's your identity? And whatever is not responsible can really never be thought of as a possibility for your life, right? What about your incompetence? You've probably spent a lot of time and maybe even spend an inordinate amount of time not only being competent, but appearing competent. So when you see someone not appearing competent, it may charge, and pull out your own shadow of that's what you don't want to see yourself become. That's what you're uncomfortable with, is appearing that way in public. And so that person brings all that forward and you're like, I cannot do it. Notice this in your relationships. Notice this with siblings. Notice this with your partner, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend. Notice how it escalates conflict, right? Because especially in more intimate relationships, it tends to be a dual explosion or a dual projection. Both people are projecting onto the other or transferring onto the other. And instead of warring with, your partner, you're warring with maybe mom or dad, and they're doing the same to you. And you can't really ever get to any kind of resolution because ultimately you're not fighting with each other. These are ghosts from the past that are standing in front of you. And so it's a proxy war. You're not fighting with your partner. You're fighting with someone else, and so are they. So a way to move through that is acknowledging who's in the room. Who is being transferred? Who's being brought into this argument that otherwise wouldn't be? It isn't here, but needs to be acknowledged so that you can set them aside and have the conversation, have the conflict with that person. If you want to take this a little bit further, you can get out a journal, go for a walk, talk it out into a voice memo. But I want you to identify the people in your life who hold significant energy, positive or negative. They may even not even really be in your life very much, right? Who's someone that holds a lot of energy from your past, positive or negative? And as you do that, start unpacking the stories around them, the judgments, the messages, the beliefs that you have about them, and don't evaluate true or untrue. Treat them as true and just trust the judgments and what comes up as you consider this person. And then imagine looking in a mirror, what do you see in them that makes you wildly uncomfortable to imagine in yourself? And that's a great place to start, because you'll start to see I really don't want to acknowledge that I'm also someone who takes up too much space, or I really don't want to acknowledge that I'm not taking up very much space. Because if I acknowledge that I'm not taking up space, then I'm going to have to probably take a step to take up more space. And that can be terrifying. And so it's easier to just let other people take up the space and judge them rather than having to confront the space or the lack of space you're taking up and move into action to change how you're showing up. If you'd like to dive deep one-on-one, we could do some really deep work in 6 to 8 sessions. Email me. You can DM me, message me, however you want. And let me know, hey, Michael, I have this person in my life that I just cannot be around. And I've seen this pattern before. Let's talk and let's see if there's not some work we can do to pull back those projections, start metabolizing them back into your psychology. And here's the thing, when you do shadow work, when you integrate that stuff, not only do you get the energy back that was used to project and to keep all that stuff at a distance, but you get back the energy of the shadow itself, that shadowed part of your personality that can do a lot of good things, that just needs probably to be reassigned into another role rather than, hey, go be banished on other people. You can bring that into yourself, and that energy can start to transform how you show up in your relationships. Email me. I look forward to walking with you if that's something you desire. Okay, take care. Love yourself. Be yourself, because you have a great self. Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Inner Work Community podcast. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, share it with your people, and leave a review. That really helps spread the word and boosts our online presence in this digital world. Remember, growth is not a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. So until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it's all a gift.